워낙 북한 군 내부에서 그 자체가 전쟁을 방불케 해요.
거기 나가는 친구들은 제가 봤을 때는 힘없고 빽이 없고 그리고 정말 죽어도 되는 친구들이 아마 나갔을 것이고요.
Leaked intelligence reports indicate that North Korea may be very close to sending more soldiers to fight alongside the Russians. After suffering thousands of casualties in the conflict against Ukraine, North Korean forces seem determined to pay an even higher price to support Putin. However, it would be a mistake to think that only Russia benefits from foreign troop support. Ukraine, in addition to receiving weapons from the West, also has the help of volunteer soldiers willing to fight alongside it to defeat Russia. These foreign fighters have had a strong impact on the war, and among them, one group deserves special attention: the Sibir Battalion. That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. You are on the Edge of Power, your geopolitics channel. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any updates on current global conflicts. This is Siberia, a vast region within Russian territory, primarily known for its extreme cold temperatures. Although it is rarely discussed, Siberia makes up 77% of Russia's total land area. That's a massive portion. This region is mostly inhabited by ethnic Russians, but various indigenous peoples, each with their own languages and cultures, also form part of the population. Among these peoples are the Yakuts, Buryats, Tuvans, and Khmer. And this is where we reach an interesting point in the story. At the end of the 16th century, Russia, led by Yermak Timofeyevich, conquered Siberia. This expansion was marked by violent battles against the local indigenous tribes, like the ones mentioned earlier. History tells us that these tribes suffered significant defeats, losing much of the territory they once controlled. Another significant moment occurred during Joseph Stalin's regime. At that time, the Soviet Union had a system of forced labor camps known as gulags. Many Siberians, including indigenous populations, were forced to work under brutal conditions. In the gulags, they endured freezing temperatures, worked until exhaustion in extreme cold, and received little food in exchange for relentless violence. Many of these people perished, leaving deep scars in history. But the repression was not just physical. It also had a huge impact on the culture and identity of these tribes. Over time, the Soviet government sought to erase their traditions and impose Russian culture upon them. In other words, they tried to force their language and culture down the throats of the remaining indigenous groups. As you might expect, this process was far from peaceful, leaving deep marks and lasting resentment. To give you an idea, many young descendants of these tribes learn from an early age that Vladimir Putin's government must be resisted, and they have plenty of reasons to believe so. One of the main reasons is the constant repression they face within their own country. The majority of regions inhabited by these minority groups in Siberia are among the poorest in Russia, and life is far from easy for them. You might recall last year's major terrorist attack in Moscow at the Crocus City Hall Event Center. It was a horrific attack that killed more than 140 people. Initially, Putin tried to blame Ukraine and the West, but the Islamic State claimed responsibility and even released videos to prove it. This left the Russian government completely off guard, as they had hoped to use the attack as propaganda against Ukraine. After the attack, the Russian government launched a brutal crackdown on Tajik migrants, a Central Asian ethnic group, accusing them of being responsible. These migrants typically work in low-paying jobs, such as garbage collection. Discrimination against them surged, and many were deported. Now, several Russian cities are struggling with waste accumulation due to a lack of workers. Imagine living in one of the country's poorest regions, surrounded by uncollected garbage. But hold on, things could still get worse. Recently, severe flooding has occurred across Russia, primarily caused by the collapse of dams in different regions, including the city of Orsk, which was partially submerged. The government has faced heavy criticism for corruption and incompetence, as these problems could have been avoided with better maintenance. And do you know what the official response was? sending priests to fly over the affected areas in helicopters and pray for the victims. On top of all this, many Siberians are being sent to fight on the front lines of the war against Ukraine. They are lured by promises of high salaries, but in most cases, they do not survive to collect their pay. With no basic living conditions, no investment, no opportunities, and seeing their young men die pointlessly on the battlefield, discontent has only grown among them. For many of these marginalized groups, a Ukrainian victory in this war means breaking free from Russian control. It was then, after Russia invaded Ukraine, that these people began to see a light at the end of the tunnel, a chance to change things. But they do not want to fight alongside Russia. They are joining the Ukrainian army. They believe that if Ukraine wins the war, it will pave the way to remove Russia from power and allow the region's inhabitants to have greater control over their own resources and future. It was in this context that, in late 2023, the Sibir Battalion, also known as the Siberia Battalion, was formed. Leading this battalion is a former Russian intelligence agent named Vladislav Amasov. The battalion is primarily composed of ex-military personnel who deserted from the Russian armed forces. Some of them were drafted into the war in Ukraine, but chose not to fight against the Ukrainians. Among the ranks, there are also ordinary citizens, many of them young men, who decided to take up arms as a form of protest against Putin's regime. Many of these volunteers are motivated by personal experiences of political repression or by family members who have suffered under the Russian government's authoritarian policies. Additionally, there are activists and opposition figures who see the battalion as an opportunity to continue their struggle against the Kremlin. For most of them, the decision to fight alongside Ukraine is a way to resist Putin's regime and defend democratic values. As we mentioned earlier, Siberia has a long history of marginalization and exploitation by the Russian government. This explains why, as soon as the Sibir Battalion was created, more than 60 men volunteered immediately. Since then, the battalion has continued to grow. It is difficult to estimate how many active members it currently has, but some reports suggest around 300 combatants. At this point, you might be thinking, just 300 men? That doesn't make any difference in the war. Russia has a much larger army. But this is where things get interesting. First, because the Siberia Battalion is not fighting alone. It is the third foreign battalion to be formed since the beginning of the war. Early in the invasion, volunteers from hundreds of countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Poland, came together to form the International Legion for the Territorial Defense of Ukraine. Another group, founded in 2014 when the Russians took Crimea, became even stronger in 2022. I am referring to the Georgian Volunteer Corps, composed mainly of fighters from Georgia, a country also deeply affected by Russian military expansionism. Reports indicate that this group includes highly experienced soldiers. Together, these groups have been actively involved and have made a significant impact on Ukraine's defense. In the case of the Sibir Battalion, their role does not seem to be limited to the trenches. They have played a strategic role in several key battles during this conflict. Want an example? Throughout 2024, the Siberia Battalion, along with other units of Russian dissidents, led a series of attacks inside Russian territory, specifically in Belgorod and Kursk, while Ukrainian forces carried out drone strikes on fuel and ammunition depots. Soldiers from the battalion carried out sabotage operations on oil pipelines to maximize the damage, setting fire to several oil depots and causing significant losses to Russia's logistics. These operations aimed to disrupt the movement of supplies for Russian troops along the border. On another occasion, these groups used explosives to destroy ammunition depots, bridges, and tunnels, as well as attack railway convoys carrying military supplies. These actions caused significant delays in troop and supply transport, increasing pressure on Russian front lines. In March of this year, the Sibir Battalion, along with other groups, carried out a major incursion into the village of Tetkino. Their goal was to destabilize Russian operations in the area by destroying bridges and critical infrastructure that facilitated troop and supply movements. Reports indicate that intense clashes took place, leading to the destruction of logistical facilities and forcing Russian troops to redeploy. The battalion also played an active role in the Battle of Avdiivka, one of the most intense and strategic campaigns of the war. Avdiivka, a city in eastern Ukraine, was the site of brutal fighting, and the battalion played a crucial role in defending the region. However, the battalion's true impact on the war extends beyond military operations. Their resistance symbolizes something much bigger: the growing anti-Russian sentiment in Siberia. Many Siberians feel abandoned and exploited, as the region's natural wealth, oil, natural gas, coal, precious metals, and timber, are heavily extracted and contribute significantly to the Russian economy. However, these benefits are not felt in Siberia. Most of the profits go directly to Moscow, while the region suffers from neglect and a lack of infrastructure. Additionally, the influx of Chinese companies into Siberia's resource extraction has fueled even more discontent among the local population. To them, Putin is favoring China while neglecting Siberians. To make matters worse, the central government treats them almost like servants, or worse, as cannon fodder for Putin's wars. As a result, the idea of Siberian separatism or autonomy, which has existed for a long time, has gained even more traction in recent years. And do you want to know why this is such a big concern for Putin? Siberia is vital for Russia. For starters, it holds the largest oil and natural gas basin in the world, the West Siberian Basin. To put it into perspective, 70% of all Russian oil comes from there. Moreover, the region has vast reserves of gold, precious stones, and other minerals. But Siberia's importance is not only economic, it is also strategic and military. It hosts several key air bases and missile launch facilities, including nuclear ones. Because it is a vast and sparsely populated territory, Siberia has also become the perfect location for the Russian armed forces to conduct large-scale exercises, involving the movement of troops, armored vehicles, and helicopters without major disruptions or concerns about civilian populations. The region is also home to numerous factories and research facilities that produce everything from weapons and vehicles to advanced defense technology, helping to maintain Russia's military self-sufficiency. So what is really at stake here? If Russia loses the war against Ukraine, the situation could change dramatically. The indigenous peoples of Siberia, long weary of exploitation and marginalization, could increase their efforts to gain independence. Now, imagine Siberia fighting for autonomy with international support. That would be a devastating blow to Russia's central government. As you can see, these separatist movements reveal something significant: growing dissatisfaction with the Russian government. If Siberia were to break away, it could mean the ultimate collapse of the Russian Federation. The Sibir Battalion stands as a symbol of all of this: resistance, the desire for freedom, and the fight against Russian oppression. In a scenario where Ukraine wins the war, the hope for a new era in Siberia could become a reality, and that is something Putin fears deeply. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep following these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.